Well, first of all, I would like to welcome you. We are the Richmond Tea Party, and we are sponsoring this event. So I'm glad you could join us this evening. We'd like to thank, first of all, Drew Bright. He was here just a few moments ago. He is the athletic director here at Douglas Freeman High School. He helped us coordinate this event, so we'd like to thank Mr. Bright. There he is, over here in the corner. Few housekeeping issues to take care of. First of all, bathrooms. You walk out the door, take a left. The ladies' room is right behind the tables where the merchandise is. We'll plug there also. And the men is about another 50 feet down the hall. Is there something in that message that the women don't have to walk as far as me? Anyway, so I'd like to let you know about that. We also have some water and some other cold drinks out there in the hall. If you get have to avail yourself, please feel free. We do have some refreshments out there along those lines. I'd like to remind you that this is a private event for Richmond Tea Party members who registered in advance. Only those who registered in advance may submit questions for the Attorney General. However, all citizens that are here, we do ask for a respectful time, even if we disagree. Now, before we get to the opening prayer and pledge, I'd like to give you a quick overview of the program tonight. In the beginning, I will be giving some opening comments, basically an update on Richmond Tea Party activities. Then I will go over an overview of the main program, and then talk about the close of the program. Just to let you know, the program is officially supposed to end at 8 o'clock tonight. After the program, we will have several items to give away. You can see them up here on the stage. So we ask you stay seated to learn whether you have won one of these items here on the stage. Feel free to mingle after the event. However, we do have to be cleaned up and out of the building by a time certain. So with that, I'd like to welcome up to the stage Gilbert Wilkerson, one of our board members, to lead us in prayer and the pledge. Would you all please stand?
Thank you, Joe. Ladies and gentlemen, I will do the prayer, and then we'll turn and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Let us bow in prayer. Almighty God, we gather here today, few in number, but mighty in spirit. Guide our cause for freedom and justice. Be our light in a dark and lonely world. Be our strength when we are weak. Shield us from the storms of tyranny and injustice. Raise up us godly leaders for our nation, who are not afraid of the arrow that flies by day, nor the terror that flies at noonday. Lord, let freedom continue in our nation. Bless our troops and protect them from all harm. Today we ask for special blessings upon our Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli. Bless he and his family, Lord. Show him and his family for the great sacrifice he does for our state and even for our nation. Bless all those that are gathered here, Lord, who love freedom and love mercy and justice. And Lord, for this we thank you. In your name, Lord, we pray. Amen. Let's face the flag to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My name is Joe Garino. I am the chairman of the board of the Richmond Tea Party. I will be the MC for the program today. Before we get into the main program, I desire to give you a little update on what the Richmond Tea Party has been up to. Some of you might be aware that we submitted an application to the IRS in December of 2009 to be qualified as a 501c4 nonprofit organization. We just got word a few weeks ago that we have been approved. Do the math there, that's 2.5 years. Normal time is 3 to 6 months. That's the good news that we got approved. The bad news is if any of you have been watching what's going on in Congress, they are trying to pass what's known as the Disclose Act. One of the challenges we have with the IRS is that they were asking for the names and contact information for our volunteers. That's not necessary to become a 501c4. So we didn't have to give that to them. It's good news. However, the administration is now trying to pass a bill through Congress that would require all organizations to give that information through the Disclose Act. So, I'd like to urge you to contact your representative and your senator at the federal level and ask them to vote no on the Disclose Act. Next, I'd like to talk to you briefly about our Elections Committee. In case you haven't noticed, we have a major election this year. We have lots of events surrounding that. We ask you to please sign up if you haven't already. First of all, I'd like to talk about voter registration. In 2008, the Democrats were very well organized. In fact, they registered 400,000 new voters here in Virginia. Out of that, 234,000 of them voted for their candidate. If folks on our side, the Tea Party side, desire to have any impact, we have to get out and register folks to vote. So we'd like to get you to help out with that. Phone bank, we are already set up. We just have to have some callers. And so if you are interested in helping out with that, we have scripts for you and where you would call citizens to learn whether they are registered to vote. That's all you do. We also have some precinct canvassers that we're asking to help out with us. And basically, when it comes to reaching out and getting people to vote one way or the other, how many of you have ever gotten a robocall? Come on, everybody, you're lying if you're not raising your hand. How many of you have seen the TV ads? There's going to be a lot more of them this year. The radio ads, and so on and so on. You get the mailers, okay? They've measured this, and they know how effective each one of those types of outreach possibilities are. Still, the #1 way of getting someone to vote a certain way is by door-to-door canvassing. It's 1 out of 14. So you can imagine how terrible all the other ones are, and they still spend all the money on it. We're looking for precinct canvassers. If you're willing to walk in your area, your neighborhood, your precinct, please get in touch with us. Voter rolls. From the comfort of your home, you can go through voter rolls to look for suspicious anomalies. Poll watching. You can get trained for work inside the polls on election day. You can watch for voter fraud at the point voter ID is presented. So if you're interested in doing any of that, please go to richmondteaparty.com and register. Next, I'd like to talk briefly about our government affairs team. While they are working throughout the year, they will pick up in earnest after the November election in preparation for the 2013 session of the General Assembly. If you aren't already connected with Richmond Tea Party for whatever reason, don't know how you found out about this event tonight, but please go to richmondteaparty.com and sign up. Also, some of you might have seen, hopefully saw the merchandise table on the outside, that those items are out there for donations. We would certainly appreciate any financial support there. If you feel like giving more than what you might like to give for that, we certainly appreciate those kinds of donations as well. Or you can go online at richmondteaparty.com. At this point, I'd like to take the time to introduce some of the leaders of the Richmond Tea Party who are here with us tonight, namely our board and officers. As I mentioned, I am the chairman of the board, Joe Garino. We have these board members here with us tonight. Susan Lascollette, please stand. Back there. I might also mention that Susan is an elected member of the Richmond Board of Supervisors. Next on the board is Corky Mann, up in the back. All right, I don't know where this guy is. Eric McGrain, where is he? He's our IT expert. Eric? Oh, there he is. The man in the green shirt in the back, Phil Scott. John John Wakefield was not able to be here with us tonight. And then our next person is Gilbert Wilkerson for the invitation. And now our officers. Unfortunately, our executive director was not able to be with us tonight. That's Bill Rapp. Our assistant executive director is here tonight. Her name is Andriana Anastasiou, all the way in the back. The secretary of the board, Julie Surface, in the yellow shirt here. And our treasurer was not able to make it tonight. His name is Michael Downey. Okay, on to the main program. Attorney General Cuccinelli's comments on the Supreme Court's recent decision regarding the federal government's federal health care reform law, officially known as the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Some rules for this evening. First of all, I am the MC. Secondly, all questions must be submitted to me on index cards. Now, Phil has some people ready to hand out some index cards. Phil is getting the index cards now. We will be handing out the index cards during the Attorney General's presentation. Please raise your hand if you'd like one, and as the gentlemen move up and down the sides of the aisles here, please raise your hand. We'll hand the cards to you. Please pass them back, and they'll work their way up to me, and I will ask questions of Mr. Cuccinelli. We kindly request respect for all present, so please no disruptions or outbursts, even if you disagree. Okay. Let's move on with an introduction of our guest this evening. I'd like to ask you a question. How have we known Ken? Most of us in Central Virginia did not know Ken before he showed up on the Senate scene in the summer of 2002. Before then, he was an attorney in Centerville, Virginia, which is in the southwestern part of Fairfax County, actively involved in local politics. But his wife, T-Row, was not very thrilled with the idea of him ever running for elected office. But then one day, she suggested he run. Ken was off to the races and has never looked back. How have we known Ken? As a senator, 2002-2010, he championed fiscal issues, private property rights issues, mental health issues, pro-life issues, and so on. One of his biggest victories came in 2007 when he was able to get a private property rights bill passed to contradict the terrible Supreme Court decision in the Kelo case in 2005. But since we know the government is prone to change to the whims of the times, other legislators picked up the mantle and pursued an amendment to the Virginia Constitution where curbing the Commonwealth's eminent domain power may be ensconced. In just the past few days, Governor McDonnell signed a bill that will put the language onto the ballot this fall when Virginians will have the opportunity to vote to put the issue championed by Ken permanently into our Commonwealth's Constitution. How have we known Ken? As Virginia's Attorney General. Since 2010, he has become the standard bearer for constitutional conservatism. In fact, by the fall of 2011, one candidate running for office described himself as a Cuccinelli constitutional conservative. Wasn't just good enough to call himself a constitutional conservative, he had to put Cuccinelli in front of it. So he's got his own brand now. What did he do to earn that moniker? Well, on March 23rd, 2010, just minutes after the man who lives in the White House signed into law the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, Attorney General Cuccinelli marched across the street from his office and filed the first lawsuit against the federal government, claiming that the law was unconstitutional. Within a few months, 26 other states filed their own suit. Ken's star began to shine all across America as he became a highly sought-after guest on numerous news programs to educate America and the liberal elite on the principles hallowed in the U.S. Constitution. How have we known Ken? Well, we've known him as a husband to his first and only wife, T-Row, for just over 2 decades, as a father to 5 daughters and 2 sons, and as the principal of the homeschool that T-Row actually runs. Last summer, I was able to watch the very human side of Ken at a political ice cream social. His sons, Jack and Max, maybe 4 and 2 at the time, were sitting at a table. The older son would feed himself 1 scoop, then serve his brother a scoop. 1 for me, 1 for you. Ken stood close by, stepping up in a few times to wipe off a mouth or clean up a shirt. And how might we know Ken? With all of his Tea Party credentials, might we come to know him by next spring as the GOP candidate to run for governor of Virginia? If you would like to know him that way, then sign up as his delegate to the GOP convention next spring, which is right here in Richmond. He is running on a platform, quote, to strengthen our economy, preserve our liberty, and promote the principles of smaller, more efficient state government. And if he wins the GOP nomination, might we then get to know him as Virginia's 72nd governor? If you like that possibility, then I encourage you to get involved in his campaign. And so, to speak to us about the recent Supreme Court decision on the Affordable Care Act, I now present Virginia's Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli.
Well, good evening to all of you. I appreciate the warm welcome, and you know, it wasn't all warm welcome, and part of the welcome was good too. I want to start off, as I do sometimes as an AG with my law enforcement partners, so many of whom are here today from Henrico, and I want to thank them. But I want to ask you all to keep them in your prayers as well. You know, we pray for our military all the time in Virginia, especially in a time of war, and that's very appropriate. But we've got evil right here. It's in every neighborhood, it's in every county, it's in every state, it's in every country. And we think of it as overseas and where our military goes to fight, but it's right here, and they keep you safe from it. So please keep them in your prayers. The healthcare ruling a couple of weeks ago was a dramatic disappointment. There was, by my count, 1 lawyer in America who thought it should come out the way it did. As it is, he is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he has some say in such things. There were 4 constitutional elements to that. The Commerce Clause, which is what the main battleground was, that both sides thought was the main battleground. Necessary and Proper Clause, the spending power, and the taxing power. And on 3 of the 4, we won. Hey, whoopee. We got limits for the first time on the Commerce Clause power. This is the power that is overwhelmingly used to impose regulation. It's regulation of commerce, be it EPA, NLRB, FCC. It's one after the other, the whole alphabet soup of regulatory agencies. It's through that commerce power. And for the first time since the New Deal, 5 justices put an outer limit on that power as it relates to the federal government. That was a great thing. They did the same thing for the first time by a 7-2 vote on the spending power. I'm going to talk more about that one because that gives us more to do here in Virginia. Also the first time since the New Deal that any meaningful limits have been put on the federal spending power. But the Chief Justice upheld the health care law under the taxing power. He treated the mandate as not a mandate, and he treated the penalty as a tax, despite the fact that the Congress itself had an earlier version of the bill in which they called it a tax, rewrote it to be a penalty, and the Chief Justice, as the dissent said, rewrote it himself That wasn't just a broad interpretation of the taxing power, though it was that. He rewrote the bill to uphold it. I don't know why he did that, but there wasn't a legal reason to do it. There wasn't a constitutional reason to do it. The person who wrote the Commerce Clause opinion, the Necessary and Proper Clause opinion, the Spending Power opinion, that legal scholar, that legal thinking is nowhere present in the writing about the taxing power. It was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde opinion. 3/4 of it Dr. Jekyll and 1/4 of it Mr. Hyde. And we are left with this health care bill. But we're also left with a couple of other items. Because it's a tax, and that's how it was upheld, the president wanted to go around and say, well, no, it's not a tax, even though he sent his lawyers into court to say it is a tax. Well, Mr. President, if it's not a tax, it's not constitutional, even according to the justices, the 5 that upheld it. Because it's a tax, under the rules of Congress, that's a revenue bill. A tax bill is a revenue bill. You do not need 60 senators to pass a revenue bill. It can't be filibustered. It's 50 plus a vice president. And to repeal a tax bill, you don't need 60 votes any longer, which you would for a Commerce Clause regulation, legislation. You need 50 and a vice president. Now, Mitt Romney's been, going around through his whole campaign and saying, I'd repeal it, I'd repeal it. Well, that's all well and good, and I believe him. He's perfectly honest about it. But a president doesn't get to repeal anything unless a bill shows up on their desk. Because repeal means a bill. It's a law. Repealing laws is still a law. And that 60 votes, frankly, as a realistic matter, was always out of reach in this election. But 50, we can get to 50. We can do it. As long as the bill can be brought to the floor, that's kind of important, and as long as Harry Reid's the majority leader, that won't happen. But if that bill can be brought to the floor, and by that I mean a repeal bill, all we need is 50 and a vice president will vote for repeal to deliver it, at least to a President Romney's desk, who has already said he'd sign it, repealing Obamacare. So we have gone from 60 votes needed. I wanted to see it go on June 28th, but it didn't. It didn't. And now we've got to live with what we've got to live with. But we have 4 more months, and I've been fighting 2.5 years, and so have all of you. Hey, what's 4 more months? We can hang in there that long, and it doesn't mean waiting and hoping. It means working, knocking, like Joe was talking about, door knocking, phone calling, talking to people at work in your neighborhood, your crazy cousin, get them all to the polls and talk them through why they need to vote for smaller government, constitutional government, and to repeal this law. I mentioned to you that states have some things to do now, some decisions to make. The one I just mentioned to you is the voters. We're the sovereigns of this place. And ultimately, we need to act like it, and that's going to happen at the ballot box. We're either going to win or lose this battle ultimately on November 6th at the ballot box. And here in Virginia, for the first time in my lifetime, we are a swing state. I believe that we are going to be in the winners column in the presidential race. I don't know which column we're going to be in, but we're going to be in the winners column. And of course, we have one of the most significant Senate races going on in the whole country here between 2 former governors, Allen and Kaine. And one has said he'd repeal, and one has said he's perfectly happy with the health care ruling, that being Tim Kaine. So we get a difference there too. Not only do I think we're going to be on the winning side in the presidential race, but we can add one of the very small number of senators necessary who are committed to repealing this bill to the U.S. Senate to make that happen too. So Virginia is going to play a role that we have not seen before. And you're already seeing it on your television with ads and your phones ringing sometimes and those kinds of things. And get used to it. There's plenty more to come. But what I really want you to do is get into it. Don't get used to it. Be part of it. This is the most important election you're going to ever live through. In my view, I don't see how it can get any bigger than what we're facing now. The downside of losing and leaving this president in office for 4 more years is more than I care to contemplate. In my role as AG, I see the damage they do. I see the regulatory burdens, the loss of opportunity, the loss of choices for business owners, and how they're smothering various parts of our economy that they don't like. And there's people involved in that. It's always about people. One thing that every conservative, every libertarian should always remember is this. This is as immutable a law of economics as gravity. When you have this kind of across-the-board regulatory assault, the first people hurt, and the people hurt the worst, are the poor. Never, ever forget that, because there's no way around it. There's no way around it. You know, people who have money to invest, you can snap your fingers and move it around the world today in ways that have never been possible before. You know, if I live in Appalachia and we've got one industry, coal mining, that's under attack by this administration, and that's all we have, I can't move around the world like that. And even if I could, it's not the kind of thing I want to do. I don't want to leave the best country in the history of the world to go follow that capital around. I want a country where that capital wants to come here so I can have a job. You drive through those parts of Virginia, you drive through the North Carolina border, they have long-term unemployment that doesn't even show up in the numbers. Those people know they're under assault. You don't have coal mining in Richmond. But in Southwest Virginia, that is the industry. You know, I live in Northern Virginia. You all have a similarly dynamic economy here. If you took one industry out of this region, most people in this room wouldn't even notice. You wouldn't even notice. You take one industry out of Southwest Virginia, you don't have any industry. The pizza place in Southwest Virginia is a coal job. Because without coal, they ain't there. And that whole swath of Virginia gets 80% of its power from coal. And APCO's rates just went up 8%. I'm the lawyer in those cases defending ratepayers. Over 5 of that 8% was direct pass-through costs of EPA compliance. The SCC, the judges said it themselves. That's what they're doing to our folks, our poorest folks in Virginia, okay? Don't forget that message. And don't just remember it for the next 4 months. Remember, it is an immutable law of economics. When you have that kind of regulation, you depress economic activity, and the first people hurt, and the people hurt worst are the poor. Go back to our main subject, the health care bill. We have some decisions now in Virginia because of the decision on the spending power, and I'm sure you all follow this closely, so I won't go into too much detail, but what the Supreme Court said is that the federal government can't hold the $3.7 billion of federal funding for Virginia's Medicaid program. It's almost exactly half our Medicaid spending. They can't hold it all hostage to Virginia joining the new Medicaid expansion, because that's what they were doing. And the Supreme Court said that is coercive of states to a degree that violates the Constitution. That is the first time there's been any ruling like that, and part of it's one thing to get the ruling, it's quite amazing to get it 7-2. That was astonishing. But what that means for Virginia now is we have the decision to make. Jimmy Massey and his 99 colleagues in the House and the Senate and the governor have to decide whether they're going to undertake that Medicaid expansion or not. And there's a lot of bait in there for the states. The first couple of years, the feds say they're going to pay it all. And then they're going to ratchet it down to paying 90%. And when it's fully implemented, we're still looking at hundreds of millions of dollars of cost. And the people who want to go down that road really need to tell us where they think that money's coming from. I mentioned I'm from Northern Virginia. You know, if you're going to take $200 million out of transportation, people in my region might have a little something to say about that. Not to say people around here wouldn't, but you get the idea. Where's it going to come from? More taxes? You know, even the president in 2009 said that more taxes in a recession is a bad idea. He was right in 2009. Now all of a sudden he wants more taxes. But he's 50% right. We'll take it. So that decision looms ahead of us. And a couple of thoughts on it. First of all, you know, I don't know where the money comes from. Second of all, this has been the biggest, most explosive part of the state budget. And that's not unique to Virginia. That's been true for a lot of states. It's been out of control, or we've been unable to control the growth of that as it crowds out other things in the budget. Whatever it is, transportation, education, public safety, and so on. That's another consideration. Another consideration is, do you believe them? Yeah, me neither. If the federal government were a person, he'd make $22,000 a year, spend $38,000, and have a credit card bill of $162,000. That's the guy who's telling us that they're going to fund this years in, years in, years in. And realize this is a roach motel for states. You can get in, but you can't get out. The Supreme Court didn't say we could get out. They just said they can't hold this other Medicaid money over our head. That's all they said. So once we're in, we're at the mercy of the feds. If they want to let us out, they can, but it's out of, then we're stuck. Then we could be giving up all those dollars to get out. So this is an important decision. It doesn't have a deadline, but Joe mentioned I'm running for governor. If I were the governor, I wouldn't do this. There's another 150 or 200, I don't know the exact number, of rulemaking. We don't even know the rules. You remember that church regulation, the one where they got to include abortion pills and sterilization and all that kind of contraception that is contrary to religion, their religion, in their insurance, right? That was one rulemaking. We got about 150 more of these to go. And who knows what's going to be in them? I don't know what's going to be in them. Heck, they don't know what's going to be in them. And that's a pretty important consideration when you're talking about signing up more or less in perpetuity for such an enormous expansion of Medicaid. That strikes me as very unwise. And I don't hear a lot of Democrats leaping to the barricades and saying, we got to get in. Although I'm going to be with Congressman Bobby Scott later this week at the Virginia Bar Association. And I know he's very enthusiastic about it. But you know, Republican or Democrat, I don't care who's in charge, the cost estimates they give you from the federal government, never right, ever. Jimmy, can you ever remember one being right? No, never. And they're broker than broke. And they're making this promise to pay X, Y, and Z out forever when they can't afford it already. So why sign up for that program? But that question is going to be before the legislature and the governor. Really, it's going to sit there for quite some time. There's no time deadline, at least right now, on this decision. The other question for our state government is the state health care exchanges. And kind of typical for this law, the law itself has a deadline of November 16th for this decision to be made. That's in the law. And then they have these regulations that say, well, maybe not. How many of you remember Calvin and Hobbes, the comic strip? Yeah, a lot of you. Remember Calvin Ball? The rules of Calvin Ball were whatever Calvin said they were. And Calvin made them up on the fly. Well, we have President Calvin Ball. Who's still fairly idealistic about the rule of law and those sorts of things. I find that very bothersome. I find it inconsistent with the founding vision of this country. We're not a clan, we're not a tribe. We all came from all over the world. But one thing that supposedly binds us together is a commitment to the rule of law, applying the same to everyone. And they just make some of this stuff up as they go along, and they're willing to change it. They think they can make regulations that trump laws and go in reverse order. And it's very concerning to me. It's why one of the things I say about this administration, quite true, and nobody's really seriously disputed it with me, is it is the greatest set of lawbreakers to run the federal government in my lifetime. As a kid. We just sued them again last week. You may not have heard about this. We sued the EPA, which I've taken to call it the Employment Prevention Agency. We sued them along with Fairfax County over regulation of water in what's called the Accotink watershed. Accotink is a creek up in Fairfax County, a fairly large one. And they're literally treating water as a pollutant, which seems a little odd under the Clean Water Act. But they're trying to use it as a surrogate for other things, and so they're regulating the flow of water. The cost of Fairfax County of the remediation just in this one watershed would be in the $400 to $500 million range. That's why a Democrat Board of Supervisors is in this lawsuit. They're a plaintiff. Almost $500 million for one watershed. And this is EPA's attempt to try and enter the land use business. Because they don't have enough to do, apparently. They continue to break the law, to push the boundaries. And let's face it, the federal government gets a lot of deference. That's why it's so important for the sovereigns of this country, American citizens, to exercise our right to vote and encourage others to do so between now and November 6th, because we need to retake control of this government, and that by those of us for whom it was set up. For the people. We need to do a little by the people. Those state healthcare exchanges have an interesting little twist to them. If the state government, meaning legislators, government, don't set up a healthcare exchange, the federal government's going to do it. Now, there are a lot of laws, including the Clean Water Act, where EPA and the federal government sets these standards and the states implement them. We do environmental enforcement in my office, and we do it. We take it very seriously. But we have the state, like DEQ, for instance, has some discretion how to implement the requirements. Well, under these healthcare exchanges, it looks like they're pretty much going to be micromanaged from the federal level from the get-go. So why bother stepping into the role of just being an administrative henchman for the federal healthcare exchange? That's point one. More critical for our businesses is that the way these things are going to be financed, or will be financed for state healthcare exchanges, is that our businesses will be subject to $2,000 and $3,000 fines per employee if their employees go into the exchanges or if they don't otherwise meet the Nancy Pelosi standard for healthcare. In the law, it says those penalties don't apply if the federal government sets up the exchange? Yeah, whoops. Whoops. And I assume they'd rather go back and rewrite that, but remember, when this law was passed, this was passed through the Senate, it was just to get 60 votes. They weren't writing the law. They sent it over to the House. That was Christmas Eve, 2009, and then Scott Brown got elected. Miracles do happen. And he got elected in Massachusetts, and all of a sudden, they couldn't send it back from the House or it'd be filibustered. So they had to vote that thing up or down. And remember, they didn't write it to become law. It was very sloppy. And while they were penalizing our businesses, if the state sets up an exchange, those penalties don't hit if the feds set it up. Now naturally, and consistent with their commitment to the rule of law, one of the new 16,000 new IRS agents has written a charming little rule that says, oh yes, they will, but remember, laws trump regulations. And so they're stuck with the text of their own law. And so that, when you combine that argument, that defense that businesses have to these penalties, with the fact that we really don't get any, apparently, any unique state say in our own healthcare exchange, if we set it up instead of the federal government, then why do it? It cost us between $5 and $25 million a year to run this. So let them do it. And we'll see what happens. But again, that's the other decision to be made in Virginia government. So that's one that lies ahead of us as well. And I guess it was last Thursday, phone call with the legislators. We had about a third of the General Assembly on, Republicans and Democrats, and walked through the Medicaid and healthcare exchange issues for them so they can make their own decision. But again, for this one also, since I'm running for governor, I'll let you know what I would do. I wouldn't set them up. I wouldn't set them up. Let the feds do it. That's where we stand. You know, if we want this thing repealed, it's in our hands, especially in Virginia. It's going to come down to November 6th. That's what this is all coming down to. So, you know, Joe was offering opportunities to get involved. I would urge you, watching Fox News, watching CNN, watching MSNBC, won't get the job done. It won't get the job done. We've got to bring the record of failure of this president to the people we know. And we've got to bring the elements of success. Mitt Romney's got an accomplished resume. And, we're about to see the Olympics start. You want a bipartisan achievement? It was digging the 2002 Olympics out of the hole. For the only time, I think, since we restarted the Olympics in 1896, the International Olympic Committee was considering pulling the Olympics out of a host country. We were that bad. It wasn't just we were behind schedule. Corruption, all the rest of it. And he turned it around. He turned it around and had a successful outcome for those Olympics. That saved America from an international embarrassment, and he did an incredible job as a manager stepping in for that turnaround. Well, I think American government needs a turnaround too, and we've got an opportunity to questions for a little while, and I appreciate y'all's hospitality.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that great explanation. We have very
Mic check! Mic check! Mic check! No access! No access! No choice! No access! No access!
Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for no reflections this evening. This is a good question. What is your opinion on the House passing multiple iterations of the repeal Obamacare bill? Still can't hear me? No. Is this into the mic? how better I can do this. What is your opinion on the House passing multiple iterations of the repeal Obamacare bill? Symbolic, strategic, or a waste of time and money?
Of course, the House, since the Republicans took the majority, has passed this at least twice. The most important one passed the first vote was the most recent one, because it was after the Supreme Court ruled. That was a tax vote, folks. That was a tax vote. And for this whole sort of cockamamie scheme that they set up in the first place, 2.5 years ago, all of it was to avoid a tax vote. That's what it was to avoid. And I will say, if the Chief Justice was going to uphold this law under one power, the advantage of upholding it under the tax power is all the way back, not to 1776, but to 1765. Americans have been pretty sensitive about tax votes. It is still the most accountable vote that congressmen and senators make. And now they're stuck with it as a tax vote. And in fact, I believe various Dems voted differently this last time, and I think it's reasonable to think that that was part of the reason. Remember back in 2009 when that noted right-winger, George Stephanopoulos, was interviewing the president. And he was insisting, no, it's not a tax, it's not a tax. Of course, as soon as we sued him, he sent his lawyers into court to argue it was a tax. And now they're trying to say it's not a tax again. They're scared to death of the tax question. And of course, because it is a tax, according to the Supreme Court, the president has raised taxes on every income strata. I mean, there's no swath of America that has escaped this president's tax increases already. And you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. So, you know, I think they're done with that, I would assume. But there was relevance to having the most recent vote that was different from the original vote, because after the Supreme Court ruling, the legal position of that bill is final. And we now know what it is. It's not an ordinary law, it's a tax bill. So.
Okay, the next question.
If a low-income woman needs an abortion, can she just stop and move to another state?
That is not acceptable question. The question is being presented on the card here. Sir, we ask for no interruptions. Cards must be presented by Richmond Tea Party members for us. Our next question. Will a doctor... Remind everyone that we did say this is a private event. We ask for decorum and respect here, please. Attorney General Cuccinelli, will a doctor be breaking the law if he accepts cash for services given to insured patients under this new law?
I think the answer, and then you note I say I think the answer to that is no. This is not, we haven't reached that point yet. There are another 150 rulemakings to go. However, we haven't gotten to that point yet. I do think that doctors, you know, I don't follow a lot of polls in all of my campaigns. I've only paid for one poll. And, but the polling number that I found most interesting when the bill was going through the Congress was the poll taken by the New England Journal of Medicine of physicians. Now, this is not a conservative periodical, quite the opposite. And the number that really struck me was their conclusion that 46% of physicians said they would work their way out of medicine. Not that they'd quit the next day, but that they would work their way out of medicine if this became the law. And, you know, you're always going to have a doctor. But right now, you tend to recognize the medical schools that your doctors come from. A few years from now, the best and the brightest aren't going to go into medicine. Why would they? They don't even get to make independent decisions. As time goes on, they get less and less independent decision-making authority. And that's the direction this bill goes. We have the next big battle, if this law survives, is the IPAB. That's not iPad, it's IPAB. It's this board of 15 people, unaccountable, who will decide what types of medical ailments and who get treatment and how much. And if you're on the wrong side of that spreadsheet, you don't get it in the program. You can still go out and pay cash, but if you're supposedly in an insurance program that qualifies, you're out of luck. You are out of luck. So don't think there won't be rationing under this program. There will. The government's going to do it. The government's going to do it.
If the Catholic Church is successful in its suit against Obamacare, what effect will this have on the law? Narrow, broad, etc.?
The lawsuit, mostly by Catholic institutions, there are other religions represented, but is a very narrow lawsuit. They could knock out just the regulation, which is about as broad an outcome, even if they're successful, that I would expect. I don't expect it to impact any other part of the law. It's just whether or not those institutions, the hospitals, your Bon Secours here, whether homeless shelters, whether schools are going to be able to continue to function or not because of the unaffordability, frankly, of the alternatives that they would have for institutions that really don't have a margin right now. And I would note the exceptions put in place under the Sebelius rulemaking we're talking about are so narrow that Jesus Christ and the 12 apostles wouldn't qualify. Absolutely true. They wouldn't qualify because they preached to people who weren't Jews, and that disqualifies them. So a Catholic school that lets in non-Catholics, disqualified. Hires non-Catholics, disqualified. Homeless shelter that lets in non-Catholics, disqualified. Does that sound like America to you? Doesn't sound like it to me. Doesn't sound like it to me. The only thing that suit would fix is that one regulation, is people's expectations.
Okay, a little passion this one. How in all common sense can it be unconstitutional to force people to buy something, but constitutional to tax people who don't buy something? I think you've spoken on this many times over the past few years, but elucidate us a little more.
Well, I don't think there's a logical way this can be the case. The Chief Justice did note that the taxing power is broader than the commerce power, and that's true, but what he's done is sort of backdoor accomplish one with the other. Now, we could go on to a convoluted level in the tax opinion for a long time. There are a lot of twists and turns that we haven't even talked about in the Chief Justice's opinion. But one of them is one reason he held it a tax was that it was sufficiently small that economically it wasn't worth you complying with it. You follow that? Yeah, I see some no's, I see some yeses. Yeah, that's what I mean by convoluted. Let's say the penalty were about what it would cost to buy yourself health insurance. The Chief Justice said then he'd call it a penalty and not a tax, and it wouldn't be constitutional. So if you thought it didn't make sense before, and his thinking here is that if the exaction, if the amount of money you have to pay is enough to actually get you to comply with the mandate, then it's unconstitutional. But this, at $700 a head, is far less than what it would cost to get the insurance, and so it's just a tax. This is so backwards from how most of us think of this. And yet, now Congress can pass a law to order you to wear a pink hat on Monday, and if you don't, they can assess you a $2.50 fine. That qualifies as a tax because it isn't as much as the hat costs to the Chief Justice, and they can make you wear it. Or you can just pay the exaction. So that the way the Chief Justice would say it, consistent with the questioner, is they're not making you wear it. They're just taxing you if you don't. Flip that coin over. you know, they don't, the courts are not always the best place to go for logical outcomes, unfortunately.
Is it federal or state law that prevents buying health insurance across state lines? We can buy auto or life insurance across state lines, but not health insurance.
Both. In the 40s, the federal government passed a law that let states basically balkanize their health insurance market. They had to allow states to do this because this is the opposite of why the Commerce Clause was set up. It was, remember back when we had the Articles of Confederation, the states were putting tariffs on the border in Maryland and Virginia, doing all these kinds of things, and they were going into an economic spiral with post-war inflation. It was not a good situation. And they realized they needed one market that one body could regulate, that being Congress, and so they wiped out all those internal barriers. Well, in the 1940s, the Congress, in its finite wisdom, decided to go ahead and let states put those borders back up, boundaries that back up, as it relates to health insurance. And so it is illegal for you as a Virginian to go buy North Carolina health insurance. And what that does economically is it obviously reduces your choice rather dramatically, and it reduces competition rather dramatically, and it raises prices. Virginia has relatively high health insurance costs for an individual relative to our border states. When I was in the state Senate, I put in a bill to unilaterally drop this. And the way it came to me was a constituent came to me and said, you know, my son has developmental deafness. It's not among the Virginia mandates. You basically have our General Assembly, present company accepted, writing health insurance policies, adding mandates with votes on the floor. And this one wasn't in there. And she said, you know, Colorado covers this. And I said, well, rather than adding a mandate in Virginia, would it be okay if we just passed a law to let you buy health insurance in Colorado? Would you be able to take care of your son then? She thought about it and said, yeah, that would do the trick. So I went and brought that bill and ran headlong into the insurance lobby. And, but I will say this, one thing about this health care debate that's been spawned by the federal legislation and the lawsuit and so forth, I think this one is a goner. It doesn't mean tomorrow, but I think the momentum is built in a lot of states to get rid of this. The defense of the insurance companies was, hey, don't make us compete with all 49 states when we can't get at the people in those states. And, you know, that's not an illogical position, especially for them. But for our consumers, I said, look, I'm about the taxpayers, I'm about individual citizens, and I'm about making health insurance more accessible. And that means you guys are going to have to compete across the country. And I lost rather badly. For now, Chris Peace has brought this bill, got out of the House, and it just hasn't gotten out of the Senate yet. So, and I think the momentum continues to build for this.
Okay, we have two more questions here. The healthcare law or tax was originated in the Senate, and I've read some people asking this question. Doesn't a tax or revenue law have to be originated in the House per the Constitution?
Article 1, Section 7 says revenue bills have to start in the House. This bill started in the House. It didn't start as a health care bill. It started as a veterans bill or something. And it came over to the Senate, and they did what's called, what we would call in Virginia, an amendment in the nature of a substitute. They wiped out the underlying bill and laid the health care bill on it. And we looked at this when we began this odyssey 2.5 years ago, and we determined that that was not a likely winner legally. So we didn't challenge that because there are court decisions that say as long as it comes from the House and over to the Senate, that's good enough, even if the bill looks totally different when it gets there. And of course, it went back to the House to be voted on again. I think that if a challenge ever arose there, the better challenge would say it didn't start as a tax bill. It started giving benefits rather than taxing Americans. And one might make that argument, which would be novel and new, and really not one that any of us thought about because we didn't think of it as a tax bill at the time. We're in a different position today. So, and unfortunately, you mentioned the Catholic lawsuits. You know, one thing this bill has spawned is a lot of litigation. I don't just mean what states have done. I mean, there's such a mess about how this is being implemented because of how it was written, that there's an awful lot of litigation laying out in our future just to figure out what each of these elements means and how they're to be implemented in accordance with the law.
And finally, this may take a little bit of education on what this is, but someone asked this question: will the state of Virginia participate in the health care compact?
Using the word "the" is a little undescriptive for people. Healthcare compact is an idea proposed in various forms in different parts of the country to have states join together to deal with this as a group of states, and thereby take it out of the hands, or at least partly out of the hands of the federal government. Every compact, you know, that's the devil's in the details question. And I'll tell you, in dealing with the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, you all don't have that down here. This is the body that governs Dulles Airport and Reagan National Airport. Virginians are a minority on that board. DC, Maryland, and the President together have more appointees to that board than the Virginia governor. Now, that probably happened because originally they thought BWI, Baltimore Washington International, would be part of it, but it's not anymore. And so here we are, you know, close to 30 years down the road or something, however long it's been, and we really don't like some of those provisions. But we can't change them in Virginia. Congress can't change them. To change them, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Congress all have to pass bills agreeing to the particular change. That's a pretty extraordinary burden. And I tell you that story to make this point. Once you set this compact up, it even trumps our state constitution. If you're comfortable with that,
Nope.
with MWA, I'm not very comfortable with that. That's presented some problems for us. And fairness problems, accountability problems, transparency problems. But once you set it up, you're stuck with it. I mean, it's another Roach Motel. Not to say it can't be done well and it can't be done right. Just realize there's not, you know, when we pass a law in the General Assembly and it gets signed into law, I remember a few years back, we went back into session to fix one law in July. It was a blue law that came into effect and was going to really mess up some businesses. And we had made a mistake in passing it. And we literally came back to Richmond to fix it. And then went home. And you can't do that with a compact. We can do that with our own laws. We can do it with our own Constitution. Our property rights have been trampled in various parts of Virginia. Individuals have been, businesses have been trampled. This year, the people of Virginia are going to get to fix that. We're going to get to fix that. And while it's hard to get a meaningful constitutional amendment, state constitutional amendment on the ballot before the voters and then approved, it's a whole lot easier than changing a compact. So, you know, that's one of those things you've got to know exactly what you're getting when you go in. Our experience has been, not to say that, you know, everything about MWA is bad, it isn't, but we don't have accountability, we don't have redress, we don't have recourse to the things we don't like how they have unrolled across time and how they played out. So that's a tough way to go. Look, thank you all very much for having me. I appreciate it.